The Courage to be Disliked summary. What the book really says about happiness, freedom, approval, trauma, and courage. The Courage to be Disliked is a Japanese philosophy, psychology, and self-development book by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. It was first published in Japan as Kirawaru Ryuki by Diamond Inc. in 2013, with major English editions following through publishers including Atria Books and Allen and Unwin. WorldCat lists the first Atria Books hardcover edition as published in New York in 2018, while Google Books lists an Allen and Unwin edition from 2018 at 288 pages. The book is built around the ideas of Alfred Adler, the Austrian psychiatrist and founder of individual psychology. The official publisher description presents it as a dialogue between a philosopher and a young man across 5 conversations, centered on the claim that people can change their lives without being permanently chained to past trauma. Social expectation, or other people's approval. The big idea of the book. The central argument of The Courage to be Disliked is blunt. Human beings are not simply products of their past, their upbringing, their wounds, or their social position. They are also choosing, often unconsciously, the meaning they give to those experiences and the purposes those meanings now serve. That does not mean pain is fake. It does not mean childhood does not matter. It does not mean people can simply think themselves into happiness by pretending nothing happened. The book's argument is sharper and more controversial than that. It says people often use the past as an explanation that protects the present. A wound can become a shield. An identity can become a prison. A grievance can become a way to avoid risk. The book's answer is Adlerian rather than Freudian. Instead of treating behavior mainly as the result of past causes, it asks what present purpose the behavior serves. Why does someone stay angry? Why does someone avoid work, love, friendship, or ambition? Why does someone say they want freedom, but continue to live for applause? The book keeps returning to one uncomfortable possibility. People may be unhappier than they need to be, because unhappiness is familiar, useful, and socially defensible. The title captures the emotional price of the argument. To become free, a person must accept that others may dislike them. Not because cruelty is noble, not because selfishness is wisdom, because a life organized around approval is not really one's own life. The argument, in one flow. The Courage to be Disliked is not written like an ordinary psychology book. It is staged as a Socratic dialogue between 2 figures, a philosopher and a young man, often called the youth. The youth arrives angry, skeptical, and combative. He believes the philosopher's claim that people can change is naive. He thinks the world is unfair. People are shaped by their past, and happiness is not available through simple philosophical reframing. The philosopher does not respond with comfort. He challenges the youth's assumptions almost immediately. The book's structure depends on friction. The youth voices the objections many readers would naturally make. What about trauma? What about abusive families? What about inferiority? What about being judged? What about people who really are damaged by what happened to them? The philosopher answers by pushing Adler's psychology to its most provocative edge. The first major confrontation concerns trauma. The philosopher argues against a purely causal view of life, where past events determine present behavior. He replaces it with a teleological view, where behavior is understood by its goal. A person does not simply act because something happened. A person may act because the behavior now achieves something: protection, attention, superiority, avoidance, revenge, control, or exemption from responsibility. This is the most controversial part of the book. Many readers recoil from it because it can sound as if the authors are denying suffering. A more careful reading is that the book is denying fatalism. It is not saying terrible experiences do not hurt. It is saying that if the past completely determines the present, change becomes impossible. The philosopher wants to preserve the possibility of freedom by refusing to let biography become destiny. From there, the argument moves into inferiority. The youth believes inferiority is a sign of failure. The philosopher says feelings of inferiority are normal because human beings are always incomplete, always comparing themselves with a possible better version of life. In Adlerian psychology, inferiority can push someone forward. It becomes destructive when it hardens into an inferiority complex, a fixed explanation for why one cannot act. The book then separates inferiority from superiority. A person who feels weak may try to compensate by becoming useful, skilled, brave, or cooperative. But another person may compensate by chasing dominance, status, grievance, or moral superiority. The philosopher is especially alert to the way weakness can become power. Someone may present themselves as damaged, misunderstood, or uniquely wronged, not only because they are suffering, but because that role gives them leverage. This is where the book becomes more severe than ordinary self-help. It does not flatter pain. It asks whether pain has become an identity. It asks whether being the victim has become more comfortable than being responsible. That question is dangerous if used against vulnerable people without care, but it is powerful when applied honestly to one's own avoidance. The next major claim is that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. This does not mean every problem is caused by other people. It means human unhappiness is usually intensified by comparison, recognition, status, belonging, rejection, envy, shame, or the fear of being judged. Even private suffering often contains an imagined audience. The philosopher's logic is simple. If there were no other people, there would be no need to feel inferior, impressive, ashamed, superior, rejected, respected, excluded, or admired. The self is social. The wound is often social. The performance is social. The prison is social. This leads into one of the book's most memorable ideas. The desire for recognition is a trap. People think they want happiness, but much of what they call happiness is approval. They want parents to approve, teachers to approve, partners to approve, employers to approve, strangers to approve, and society to confirm that their life has value. The philosopher argues that a life built on recognition is a life lived according to someone else's scoreboard. The book attacks praise and punishment for similar reasons. Praise seems positive, but the philosopher sees it as vertical. The person who praises places themselves above the person being praised. They become the evaluator. The other person becomes dependent on evaluation. Punishment works through fear. Praise works through dependency. Both can train people to look outward for permission. This is one of the book's strongest and strangest claims. Most people want more praise, not less. The authors are not saying encouragement is bad. They are drawing a line between horizontal encouragement and vertical approval. Encouragement treats another person as equal and capable. Praise can quietly turn them into a performer. From here, the courage to be disliked introduces separation of tasks. This is the practical heart of the book. A person must learn to distinguish between their own tasks and other people's tasks. Your task is what you can choose, control, or act on. Another person's task is how they respond, judge, approve, reject, interpret, or feel. The simplest version is this: you can choose how to live, but you cannot choose whether everyone likes it. You can tell the truth, but you cannot control whether someone is offended. You can work seriously, but you cannot control whether your boss recognizes it. You can love someone honestly, but you cannot control whether they love you back. Confusing these categories creates misery. The separation of tasks is not emotional coldness. It is a boundary principle. It stops people from invading other people's lives and stops them from surrendering their own lives to other people's reactions. Parents invade children's tasks when they control every outcome. Adults abandon their own tasks when they live entirely to avoid criticism. Partners destroy intimacy when they make themselves responsible for each other's moods. This idea also explains the title. To be disliked is not the goal. It is the risk that must be accepted. If someone cannot tolerate being disliked, they cannot separate tasks. They will keep adjusting, apologizing, pleasing, hiding, editing, and shrinking until their life is no longer an expression of conviction, but a negotiation with imagined judges. The youth resists this fiercely because the idea sounds lonely. The philosopher's answer is not isolation. He introduces community feeling, one of Adler's central concepts. Adlerian institutions describe Adler's work as deeply social, concerned with belonging, significance, encouragement, equality, and contribution. Adler Graduate School summarizes Adler's view as rooted in the human need to belong and feel significant, while Adler University emphasizes community feeling, cooperation, and social responsibility. This matters because the book is often misread as individualistic. It is not telling readers to stop caring about others. It is telling them to stop living for approval and start living through contribution. That difference is everything. Recognition asks, do they approve of me? Contribution asks, am I useful here? Recognition creates dependency. Contribution creates direction. Recognition depends on applause. Contribution can exist quietly. Recognition keeps the self at the center. Contribution places the self inside a wider human field. The philosopher then develops three linked ideas: self-acceptance, confidence in others, and contribution to others. Self-acceptance means seeing clearly what one has and does not have, without fantasy or self-hatred. It is not inflated confidence. It is the refusal to waste life pretending to be someone else. Confidence in others means relating without constant suspicion. This is not blind trust in everyone. It is a basic stance that makes social life possible. If a person demands guarantees before trusting, they will never trust. Relationships require risk because human beings cannot be controlled like machines. Contribution to others completes the triangle. A person finds a sense of worth not by being praised, but by feeling that they are of use. The book's version of happiness is not pleasure, achievement, domination, or validation. It is the felt sense of contribution within a community. The philosopher's argument then becomes more existential. Life is not a line where meaning arrives only after reaching a destination. The book criticizes the idea that life is valuable only if it leads to a recognized success. If happiness is always deferred until graduation, promotion, marriage, wealth, fame, retirement, or universal approval, then the present becomes a waiting room. Instead, the book treats life as a series of moments. A person lives now, not later. The meaning of life is not handed down as one grand mission. It is created in how one lives each present task. This is where the book becomes more philosophical than psychological. It rejects the fantasy that life must be justified from the outside. The final movement of the argument is about courage. Courage is not confidence that everyone will approve. Courage is acting without that guarantee. The courage to be disliked is therefore the courage to stop outsourcing one's life. The youth's journey across the dialogue is not a simple conversion from ignorance to enlightenment. His resistance is part of the book's method. He is there to make the reader argue. Without him, the philosopher's ideas would sound too clean. With him, the reader sees the cost of accepting them. Each claim threatens something emotionally useful: the comfort of blaming the past, the pleasure of being recognized, the safety of pleasing others, the drama of inferiority, and the fantasy that happiness can be reached without risk. The most important ideas inside the argument. The first important idea is that the past does not have to function as a prison. The book's most explosive argument is its rejection of trauma as destiny. This does not make it a trauma manual, and it should not be used as a substitute for therapy. Its purpose is philosophical. to stop people from treating history as an unbreakable sentence. The second idea is that people organize behavior around hidden goals. Anger, withdrawal, anxiety, superiority, and helplessness may all serve purposes. A person may avoid trying because failure would threaten their identity. They may remain resentful because resentment preserves moral advantage. They may seek pity because pity protects them from expectation. The third idea is that inferiority is not the enemy. Inferiority can become fuel. The problem begins when a person turns it into an excuse or converts it into superiority. The person who constantly says they are not good enough, and the person who constantly needs to prove they are better, may be trapped in the same comparison system. The fourth idea is that interpersonal relationships are the main battlefield of human unhappiness. The book keeps pulling private misery back into the social world. Shame requires imagined judgment. Pride requires comparison. Approval requires an audience. Rejection requires attachment to someone else's verdict. The fifth idea is that approval is not love. Approval is conditional evaluation. Love, friendship, cooperation, and community require a more equal structure. The book wants the reader to stop confusing being liked with being free. The sixth idea is separation of tasks. This is the cleanest practical tool in the book. Ask, whose task is this? If it is your task, act. If it is someone else's task, stop trying to control it. Much anxiety comes from trying to manage other people's reactions while neglecting one's own responsibility. The seventh idea is horizontal relationship. The book argues against vertical hierarchies of worth. People may have different roles, ages, skills, and responsibilities, but they do not have different human value. This is why the philosopher criticizes praise, punishment, domination, and dependency. The eighth idea is contribution. The book's answer to nihilism is not self-esteem. It is usefulness. A person does not need to be superior to matter. They need to participate, cooperate, and contribute. The ninth idea is the courage to be normal. This is one of the book's most underrated claims. Many people do not only fear failure, they fear ordinariness. They would rather be dramatically wounded, secretly exceptional, misunderstood, or destined for greatness than simply live well without spectacle. The 10th idea is that life is lived in the present. The book is suspicious of destination thinking. A life sacrificed to future recognition can become empty, even if the recognition eventually arrives. The strongest chapter or section. The strongest section is the separation of tasks. It is the moment where the book stops being merely provocative and becomes directly usable. Many self-help books tell people to set boundaries, but they do not explain the logic of boundaries. The courage to be disliked gives the logic in a form that can be tested instantly. When you are anxious, ask whether you are trying to control someone else's task. When you are resentful, ask whether you are taking responsibility for something that does not belong to you. When you are people-pleasing, ask whether you are sacrificing your task to manage another person's judgment. This idea works because it is precise. It does not require a mood change. It does not require motivation. It requires classification. What belongs to me? What belongs to them? What action is mine? What reaction is theirs? The principle is especially powerful in family, work, relationships, publishing, leadership, and creative life. A writer can control the work, not the reader's praise. A manager can control clarity, not everyone's emotional comfort. A partner can control honesty, not the other person's maturity. A parent can guide a child, not own the child's life. An ambitious person can control effort, not status. The risk is that separation of tasks can become an excuse for emotional detachment. Used badly, it can turn into, not my problem. Used properly, it means, I will do my part without stealing yours. The weakest chapter or section. The weakest part of The Courage to be Disliked is its handling of trauma. The book's rejection of trauma determinism is philosophically important, but its presentation can feel too absolute. For readers with serious abuse, neglect, grief, illness, coercion, addiction, or psychiatric trauma, the argument may sound dismissive if read without nuance. The authors are trying to defend agency. That is valuable. But agency does not require pretending that all burdens are equal. Some people have more severe constraints than others. Some nervous systems have been shaped by repeated threat. Some choices are made under pressure, poverty, violence, disability, or dependency. A serious reading should preserve the book's challenge without flattening lived reality. The book is strongest when it says, "Your past does not have to decide your future." It is weakest when readers hear, "Your past does not matter." Those are not the same claim. A second weakness is the dialogue format. The youth sometimes feels like a designed opponent rather than a fully natural person. He raises useful objections, but the philosopher usually controls the terms. Readers who already disagree with Adlerian psychology may feel that the conversation is rigged toward the philosopher's victory. A third weakness is cultural translation. The book's critique of recognition, hierarchy, and social expectation carries particular force in contexts where conformity and social duty are intense. In more individualistic cultures, some readers may misread it as permission to ignore obligations. The book does not argue for selfishness, but its title can attract selfish readings. What the book proves. The Courage to be Disliked proves that a large part of ordinary unhappiness is maintained by social comparison, approval-seeking, and confusion over responsibility. Its strongest practical claim is that people often suffer because they try to control reactions that are not theirs to control. It also proves that Adlerian psychology remains unusually accessible when translated into everyday conflict. The concepts are not trapped in clinical language. Inferiority, task separation, contribution, courage, community, and recognition are immediately recognizable in ordinary life. The book proves that freedom is not mainly a mood. It is a discipline of responsibility. A person becomes freer, not by receiving universal permission, but by giving up the demand for it. What the book does not prove. The book does not prove that trauma has no lasting effect. It argues against trauma as destiny, but it does not supply enough clinical evidence to settle modern debates about trauma, memory, nervous system adaptation, or complex psychological injury. It does not prove that all interpersonal suffering can be solved by reframing. Some relationships involve coercion, abuse, exploitation, legal duties, financial dependence, or real danger. Separation of tasks is useful, but it cannot replace safety planning, therapy, law, or material support. It does not prove that recognition is always harmful. People need feedback, affection, encouragement, and social response. The better argument is that dependence on recognition becomes harmful when it replaces internal direction and contribution. It does not prove that contribution always produces happiness. Someone can contribute and still be exploited. Someone can serve others while neglecting themselves. Contribution must be paired with equality, not martyrdom. What most summaries miss. Most summaries reduce The Courage to be Disliked to one slogan: stop caring what people think. That misses the structure of the argument. The book is not about becoming indifferent. It is about replacing approval with contribution. That distinction changes everything. Indifference says, other people do not matter. Contribution says other people matter, but their approval is not the measure of your life. Indifference can become narcissism. Contribution requires social responsibility. Most summaries also miss how much of the book is about equality. The critique of praise, punishment, superiority, inferiority, recognition, and vertical relationships all points toward the same moral structure. Do not place yourself above or below other people. Stand beside them. Another missed point is the book's suspicion of specialness. Many readers like the confidence message, but resist the courage to be normal. The book does not tell the reader they are secretly extraordinary. It asks whether the need to be extraordinary is itself a trap. The final missed point is that the book's freedom is costly. It is easy to say, you do not need approval. It is harder to act when approval is actually withdrawn. The title is not decorative. Being disliked is the test. What most people misunderstand. The most common misunderstanding is that the book teaches selfishness. It does not. It teaches responsibility without approval addiction. A selfish person says, only my desires matter. The book says, my tasks are mine, your tasks are yours, and we meet as equals. That is not the same thing. In fact, the book's emphasis on contribution makes selfishness impossible as a final interpretation. Another misunderstanding is that the book tells people to suppress emotion. It does not ask readers to become cold. It asks them to understand what emotions are doing. Anger may be real, but it may also be a tool. Fear may be real, but it may also protect avoidance. Shame may be painful, but it may also preserve attachment to someone else's judgment. A third misunderstanding is that accepting yourself means approving of everything about yourself. The book's self-acceptance is not complacency. It means beginning from reality. You cannot use equipment you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot build from a fantasy version of yourself. A fourth misunderstanding is that contribution means being useful to everyone. The book's contribution is not people-pleasing in moral clothing. Contribution is grounded in horizontal relationship. If you become a servant to gain approval, you have returned to the recognition trap. The dangerous misreading. The dangerous misreading of the courage to be disliked is to use it as a weapon against other people's pain. A careless reader can turn the book into cruelty. Your trauma is just an excuse. Your anxiety is your choice. You only suffer because you want attention. That is not wisdom. That is superiority, pretending to be philosophy. The book is best used inward first. Ask where you are hiding behind biography. Ask where resentment has become useful. Ask where you want applause more than freedom. Ask where you are invading someone else's task. Ask where you are demanding guarantees before acting. Used on oneself, the book can be liberating. Used carelessly on others, it can become arrogant and emotionally illiterate. The second dangerous misreading is to confuse being disliked with being admirable. Some people are disliked because they are courageous. Others are disliked because they are selfish, unreliable, cruel, or dishonest. Disapproval alone proves nothing. The question is whether the dislike comes from living responsibly according to your task, or from refusing responsibility altogether. The tailored interpretation. The Courage to be Disliked is really a book about status withdrawal. Most people think they want happiness, but they keep choosing systems that promise status, approval, superiority, victimhood, specialness, moral advantage, romantic validation, professional recognition, social media applause, family approval, or revenge. The book's genius is that it sees how even suffering can become a status position. The victim can become superior to the person who hurt them. The outsider can become superior to the crowd. The perfectionist can become superior to ordinary effort. The people-pleaser can become superior through sacrifice. The angry person can become superior through judgment. The insecure person can avoid competition by declaring the competition unfair. The philosopher's message is not soft. He is asking the youth to give up the rewards of the identity he hates. That is why the youth fights so hard. People do not only fear change because change is difficult. They fear change because their current misery gives them something. The book's deepest challenge is this: are you willing to lose the benefits of the role you complain about? If you are the misunderstood one, who are you without misunderstanding? If you are the damaged one, Who are you without the protection of damage? If you are the superior one, who are you without comparison? If you are the helpful one, who are you without being needed? If you are the ambitious one, who are you without applause? The courage to be disliked is also the courage to be unimportant in other people's theater. You do not need to be the hero, the victim, the genius, the martyr, the rebel, or the chosen one. You need to live your task, contribute where you can, and stop auditioning for verdicts. That is why the book remains sharper than many modern self-help books. It does not merely tell the reader to love themselves. It asks them to abandon the hidden emotional economy that makes self-hatred useful. Why this book still matters. The courage to be disliked matters more in an age of permanent visibility. Social media has turned recognition into a daily scoreboard. Likes, comments, follows, views, shares, rankings, read receipts, online status, and public judgment make approval measurable. That makes the book's warning more urgent. The desire for recognition is no longer occasional. It is designed into platforms. People do not simply wonder whether others approve. They can check. They can refresh. They can compare. They can watch silence happen in real time. They can turn identity into performance and performance into anxiety. The book also matters because many people now explain themselves through wounds. Some of that is healthy. Naming harm can break denial. But identity built entirely around injury can become limiting. The book pushes back against a culture where explanation can become exemption, and where being understood can become more important than changing. At work, the book matters because professionals often confuse responsibility with control. They try to manage every perception, anticipate every criticism, and absorb every emotional reaction. Separation of tasks is a serious leadership tool. It keeps accountability clean. In relationships, the book matters because love often collapses into mutual task invasion. One person tries to control the other's mood. Another avoids honesty to prevent conflict. Someone gives care in order to receive recognition. Someone mistakes jealousy for commitment. The book's horizontal relationship principle cuts through that confusion. In creative life, it matters because publishing, writing, art, entrepreneurship, and public work all require the courage to be disliked. Anyone who creates for an audience must eventually accept that some people will misunderstand, ignore, criticize, or reject the work. Without that acceptance, the audience becomes the owner. If you only remember 3 ideas. First, separate your tasks from other people's tasks. Your job is to choose your actions, values, effort, honesty, and direction. Other people's reactions belong to them. When you confuse those categories, you lose freedom. Second, stop replacing happiness with recognition. Approval feels like safety, but it creates dependency. The more you need to be praised, liked, desired, or validated, the less you can act from conviction. Third, contribute without making yourself superior or inferior. The book's answer is not selfish independence. It is horizontal usefulness. You do not need to dominate, impress, rescue, or be rescued. You need to participate in life from a position of equal human worth. The sentence that explains the book. Freedom begins when you stop using the past, other people's judgment, and your need for recognition as reasons to avoid your own task. The real-life test. The practical test of the courage to be disliked is simple. Notice where you are waiting for permission. If you are waiting to be liked before you speak honestly, you are living inside someone else's task. If you are waiting to feel confident before acting, you may be using fear as a gatekeeper. If you are waiting for your past to stop hurting before building a future, you may have turned pain into a life sentence. If you are waiting for universal recognition before valuing your work, you have handed strangers the authority to define your worth. The next test is to track resentment. Resentment often points to a violated task boundary. You may be doing someone else's work, carrying someone else's emotions, seeking approval you pretend not to want, or expecting another person to reward a sacrifice they never requested. The third test is contribution without applause. Do something useful, and do not announce it. Improve the work without needing praise. Tell the truth without controlling the response. Help without turning help into leverage. Create without demanding immediate validation. The fourth test is ordinariness. Can you be normal and still act? Can you work without imagining a grand identity? Can you love without drama? Can you improve without turning your life into a heroic comeback story? Can you be disliked without turning the other person into a villain? The book becomes real only when approval is actually at stake. It is easy to admire freedom, in theory. The test comes when someone disapproves, misunderstands, withdraws affection, or refuses to clap. At that point, the reader discovers whether they wanted freedom or merely a more flattering audience. 5 questions to test whether you understood the book. Where in your life are you trying to control another person's task instead of doing your own? Which identity gives you hidden benefits, even though you complain about it? Are you seeking contribution, or are you seeking recognition disguised as contribution? What would you do differently if being disliked was painful but no longer decisive? Where have you mistaken the explanation of your behavior for permission to keep repeating it? The final lesson. The courage to be disliked is not gentle reassurance. It is a demand for adulthood. It tells the reader to stop treating the past as a script, stop treating approval as oxygen, stop treating inferiority as destiny, and stop treating other people's reactions as personal property. It does not promise that freedom will feel comfortable. It says freedom will cost you the fantasy of being understood by everyone. That is the hard edge of the book. Happiness is not found by winning the argument with the world. It is found by living one's own task, standing in horizontal relationship with others, contributing without begging for applause, and accepting that a life of conviction will sometimes make you unpopular. The title is not telling you to seek rejection. It is telling you to stop making rejection your master.